Olivia Parker stood outside the softly lit restaurant, her reflection trembling in the glass as she smoothed the front of her navy blue dress. The fabric clung in places she wished it wouldn't, reminding her of every cruel word she'd ever absorbed, every time someone told her she was too much. Her blonde hair curled neatly over her shoulders, lipstick carefully applied for the first time in years. 3 years to be exact since her last date. 3 years since she'd sworn she'd never put herself in a position to be judged again, not after the breakup that left her questioning her worth. Yet here she was, choosing courage over fear, taking a chance on a blind date because some quiet part of her still believed in the possibility of being seen for who she truly was. The host greeted her with polite warmth and led her to a corner table where a small candle flickered, its light soft against her nervous hands. Olivia sat down, folding her fingers tightly in her lap as she tried to steady her breathing. Around her, laughter floated through the air, couples leaning into each other, families enjoying their meals, the clink of glasses creating a rhythm of belonging she wasn't sure she could ever feel part of. Then she saw him. Daniel, her date. He walked toward her with the easy confidence of someone who had never once questioned his place in the world. A crisp white shirt, dark jeans, an expression that shifted the moment his eyes landed on her. Olivia's small, hopeful smile froze. His face dropped. His gaze swept over her like a blade, sharp and merciless. "You said you were curvy," he muttered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I was expecting smaller." The words pierced like ice water down her spine. Conversations around them faltered. She felt her cheeks burn as forks clinked against plates, people stealing glances in uncomfortable silence. Daniel didn't stop there. He smirked, voice rising cruelly. "Do they charge extra when someone looks like they might order the whole menu?" The air cracked with the weight of it. Someone gasped. A woman at the next table shook her head in disbelief. Olivia's chest tightened, her throat constricting as humiliation and rage warred inside her. She shot to her feet, nearly toppling her water glass, desperate to escape before the tears that burned behind her eyes betrayed her. Purse clutched in hand, she turned toward the door, vowing never again to open herself to this kind of cruelty. But then, just as her fingers brushed the handle, a deep, steady voice cut through the silence. "Don't let a man like that make you doubt your worth." Olivia froze. Slowly she turned. At the table beside hers, a man was standing, broad-shouldered in a gray blazer, dark hair slightly tousled, eyes steady with something she hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not mockery, fire. And in that moment, the night that had started as her worst fear began to shift into something she never could have expected. The restaurant had fallen into an uneasy hush. Olivia's heart thundered in her chest as she stood frozen by the door, caught between flight and shame. But the man at the neighboring table didn't let the moment slip into silence. He rose calmly, adjusting the cuff of his gray blazer, and walked toward Daniel, the man who had humiliated her. His steps were measured, unhurried, but his presence commanded attention. Conversation stilled completely. "Being cruel isn't clever," the stranger said, his tone even but sharp as glass. "It's cowardly, and everyone here sees it." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. For the first time that evening, the smug grin wavered. A few people at nearby tables nodded subtly, one woman whispering, "Good for him." Daniel's face turned red, his jaw tight. He muttered something under his breath, shoved his hands into his pockets and stormed toward the door, brushing past Olivia without so much as an apology. The bell above the entrance jingled harshly as he left, a sound that felt like the final slam of humiliation. Olivia stood frozen, every muscle trembling with adrenaline. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the night and forget this had ever happened, but then the stranger turned back to her. He didn't smile or attempt charm. His gaze was steady, kind but not pitying. "You okay?" he asked softly. Her throat tightened. She managed a shaky nod, though her body betrayed the truth. She was anything but okay. He studied her for a moment longer, then gestured gently toward her table. "Would you let me sit with you, just dinner, nothing else?" The words were simple, without expectation. And yet something in his tone, calm, firm, steady, anchored her in place. Olivia hesitated, torn between instinct and exhaustion. Running away had always been her default. But tonight, after years of hiding, she had chosen to show up. Maybe walking away again would mean surrendering to every cruel voice she'd ever believed. Slowly, almost against her own will, she nodded. The man returned to the table with her, pulling out her chair with quiet respect. He waited until she was seated before taking the spot across from her. The candle flickered between them, its glow softening the tension that clung to her skin. The waiter appeared awkwardly, unsure of what to do. The man spoke first. "Could we get a fresh setting here? And 2 glasses of red, something soft?" His voice was warm, practiced in control, yet never harsh. The waiter nodded quickly, relieved to have direction, and disappeared. Olivia clutched her napkin in both hands, eyes fixed on the table. "You really didn't have to do that," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, leaning back slightly, his tone gentle. "But I wanted to. No one should walk out of a restaurant feeling smaller than when they walked in." She gave a faint, ironic laugh, though it cracked at the edges. "That's funny, considering that's exactly why he left, because I wasn't small enough." The stranger shook his head slowly, his expression firm. "He walked out because he was small, not you." The words landed deep, stirring something she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. Not compliments, not platitudes, but truth spoken without hesitation. The wine arrived, giving her a moment to gather herself. She took a sip, grateful for something to occupy her shaking hands. The knot in her stomach began to ease. He opened the menu casually, as though they weren't sitting in the aftermath of a public humiliation. "I don't know about you," he said, "but I'm starving. What do you say we order something real, no judgment, just food?" Olivia blinked at him, caught between disbelief and relief. Slowly she nodded. "Okay." When the waiter returned, she ordered pasta, her voice steadier this time. He ordered steak. There was no hesitation, no apology in either choice. Just 2 people reclaiming the simple act of eating a meal without shame. As the waiter left, the air between them grew warmer, quieter. Not romantic, not yet, but human. She glanced up at him finally, really seeing him. Dark hair tousled slightly, strong but kind eyes, and a presence that felt unshakable. He carried himself with the ease of someone used to being in control, but there was no arrogance in it, only steadiness. "You stepped in like you've done that before," she said carefully. He gave a small smile. "Not always this calmly, but I've been in your shoes more than once." Her brows lifted in surprise. "Really?" He nodded. "First year of college, I asked a girl out. Thought it was going well until I overheard her telling her friends she only said yes because she wanted to see if I could fit into the theater seats." Olivia winced. "That's awful." "Yeah, it was." He paused, then shrugged. "I stopped dating for a long time after that. Thought I was the problem, but eventually something changed." "What changed?" she asked before she could stop herself. He ran his thumb along the rim of his wineglass, eyes distant. "A book, actually. Sounds silly, but I wandered into a used bookstore one day and the woman behind the counter handed me something. Said, 'This one's been waiting for you.' It was a romance novel, and in one line it said, 'You are not less worthy just because someone else couldn't carry your weight with kindness.' It stuck with me." Olivia's breath caught, her hand stilled on her glass. That line wasn't just familiar, it was hers. But she said nothing, not yet. She only whispered, "That's a beautiful line." He looked at her closely, his voice softer. "You think so?" Her eyes met his, steady this time. "I know so." For the first time that night, Olivia felt her body unclench. The shame Daniel had left behind was still there, lingering like smoke, but it no longer suffocated her. She was sitting across from someone who didn't see her size as a joke, or a flaw, or a burden. He saw her as a person, and for the first time in years, she felt the possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone could sit across from her and not want her to disappear. The candle flickered gently between them, casting a golden glow across Olivia's face. She still held her napkin a little too tightly, but the knot of shame in her stomach had begun to loosen. Across the table, Mark sat calmly, his posture relaxed, like he had all the time in the world to simply be there with her. The waiter set down their plates, pasta with roasted vegetables for Olivia, steak with potatoes for Mark. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted upward, warm and comforting. For the first time in years, Olivia didn't immediately second-guess what was in front of her. She didn't feel the urge to apologize for eating. Instead, she picked up her fork slowly, almost testing the waters. Mark noticed, but said nothing. He simply cut into his steak and took a bite, as though the food on her plate had no bearing on her worth. That, more than anything, put her at ease. "You know," he said after a moment, "I wasn't always this comfortable with food or with myself." Olivia glanced up, curiosity flickering across her features. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass absent-mindedly. "Growing up, I was the big kid. That was the label, not Mark. Not the boy who loved books or the kid who could run faster than most people thought, just the big kid. And when people decide what you are, it's hard not to believe them." Her fork hovered mid-air. "That sounds familiar?" He gave her a small, knowing smile. "I figured it might." Something softened inside her. She took a bite of pasta, and the warmth of it seemed to spread further than her chest. For once, the act of eating wasn't a spotlight. It was just dinner. They sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the murmur of voices from other tables. Then Olivia spoke, her voice low, almost testing whether he was truly listening. "People don't see me first. They see my body. It's like everything else about me disappears. My work, my writing, my humor, none of it matters. They just see someone they've already decided doesn't belong." Mark set his fork down gently, his eyes steady on hers. "Then they're blind." Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected such a simple, firm response. Most people offered pity or half-hearted reassurance, but his words carried weight, as if he actually believed them. "You say that like it's obvious," she whispered. "It is," he replied. "The problem isn't you, it's the smallness of their vision." Olivia blinked rapidly, her chest heavy with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She'd carried so many invisible scars from years of casual cruelty, locker room jokes, whispered comments on buses, her own reflection staring back with disappointment. And yet here was someone who didn't just dismiss her pain but met it head-on without flinching. "You really believe that?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. "I do," he said simply. The waiter returned to offer dessert. Olivia shook her head, but not because she was ashamed or afraid of judgment. She was too absorbed in the conversation, in the strange lightness blooming in her chest. Mark leaned forward slightly. "What about you? You mentioned earlier you hadn't been on a date in a long time. What made you decide to come tonight?" Her laugh was soft and self-deprecating. "Honestly, I don't even know. Some mix of stubbornness and hope, I guess. I told myself it was just dinner, just one night where I'd try not to hide." She paused. Clearly that didn't go as planned. "But you stayed," he reminded her. "That's something." She tilted her head, surprised. "Stayed? You could have walked out after what he said. And maybe you wanted to, but you didn't. You're still here, sitting across from me, telling me the truth. That takes more courage than you realize." Her lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever framed her presence as an act of courage before. For years, she'd seen it as endurance at best, survival, never bravery. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was charged, like the air before rain. Olivia's eyes lingered on him, noticing the steadiness in his expression, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from him without effort. "You're different," she said finally. Mark raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Different how?" "You don't look at me like—" She trailed off, struggling for words. "Like I'm a problem to solve or a joke to laugh at or like you need to apologize for existing," he finished gently. Her eyes widened. "Yes, because you don't," he said firmly. Her chest ached with a mix of relief and disbelief. For so long she had carried the weight of invisibility and hypervisibility at the same time, ignored as a person, magnified as a body. And here was someone who saw neither first. He simply saw her. By the time the check arrived, Olivia realized something extraordinary had happened. She had eaten an entire meal without shame. She had spoken truths she'd never dared say aloud. And she hadn't once felt like she needed to shrink herself to be acceptable. As they stood to leave, Mark gestured toward the door with quiet ease. "Thank you for letting me join you tonight," he said. She blinked at him, startled. "You're thanking me?" He nodded. "Of course, you trusted me enough to stay. That's not something I take lightly." Her chest tightened again, but this time with something brighter than pain. For the first time in years, Olivia walked out of a restaurant not trying to disappear, but holding her head just a little higher. The bell above the bookstore door chimed softly as Olivia Parker stepped inside. the warm scent of old paper and polished wood wrapped around her like an old friend. This place had always been her sanctuary, long before anyone knew the name Amelia Rose. Before the late-night writing sessions, before the emails from strangers who said her words saved them. Here, she was just Olivia, the girl who loved stories because they never looked at her the way people did. She wandered through the aisles, running her fingertips over spines of novels she had read a dozen times. Near the romance section, her eyes flickered across a familiar cover. The Garden in the Fog, her own book. It was tucked halfway behind a glossy bestseller, as though hiding, just as she often did. A pang of bittersweet pride struck her chest. She still couldn't quite believe that something born from her private pain had found its way into so many hands. Then she saw him, Mark, standing across the aisle, head bent, flipping through a book with a kind of reverence that felt sacred. His brow was furrowed in thought, and for a moment he hadn't noticed her. Olivia's instinct was to turn, to slip quietly toward the exit before he could see her. Their dinner together had left her rattled in ways she wasn't ready to face. But then his voice broke the silence. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, just reading aloud, almost as if to himself. This author, she writes like she's lived through every kind of heartbreak and still found a reason to love people. Olivia froze. Mark turned slightly, catching sight of her at last. Surprise flickered across his features, then softened into warmth. "Olivia," he said. Her lips curved into a nervous half-smile. "Hi." He lifted the book in his hand. The gold letters across the front gleamed in the dim light. Amelia Rose. "You know this one?" he asked. Her heart thundered. She swallowed hard. "I might have heard of it." Mark smiled, completely oblivious to the storm behind her eyes. "I've read it 3 times. Every time I feel like I'm stuck somewhere I can't climb out of, I come back to it. The way she writes." His voice faltered, as if the words themselves mattered too much. "I've never met her, but somehow she gets it. She gets me." Olivia's chest tightened painfully. He didn't know that the very words that had pulled him through his darkest nights had poured out of her when she was barely holding herself together. "Maybe you'll meet her someday," she said softly, her voice barely steady. Mark's smile widened. That would be something. They stood in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. Around them, strangers wandered the aisles, flipping through books, unaware of the fragile thread stretching tight between the two of them. Finally, Mark tilted his head toward the small cafe in the corner of the store. "Coffee?" he asked gently. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, Olivia nodded. They sat across from each other at a corner table, the warm glow of copper lamps spilling soft light across their faces. No candles this time, no awkward interruptions, just coffee and conversation. Mark stirred his cup slowly. "You know, people think loneliness is about being alone, but I don't think that's it." He paused, searching for the right words. "I think it's more like being unseen, like you're shouting and no one's listening." Olivia's fingers tightened around her mug. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Or worse," she whispered, "like you're whispering and someone hears you, but they pretend they didn't." His eyes lifted sharply to hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Something in that silence said more than words could. After a while, he glanced toward the window, where the evening light dipped into shades of orange and violet. "There's a park nearby. Want to walk a bit?" She hesitated, then nodded. They strolled down a tree-lined path, leaves crunching beneath their feet. The city noise faded, replaced by the rustle of wind and the distant bark of a dog. He didn't try to hold her hand. He didn't push the conversation anywhere it didn't want to go. Instead, he let her be, and that more than anything made her feel safe. At one point, Mark laughed softly. "You know, when I first read The Garden in the Fog, I thought to myself, whoever wrote this must have been through hell. But the way she still chose tenderness over bitterness, that saved me. It reminded me I wasn't broken beyond repair." Olivia's throat ached. She wanted to tell him the truth, that the words he clung to were hers, that she had written them in the darkest nights when she thought she'd never matter to anyone. But fear anchored her tongue. What if knowing changed the way he saw her? So instead she met his gaze, her voice trembling but steady enough. "Sometimes words find us long before people do." Mark held her eyes for a long, quiet moment, and Olivia knew deep down that sooner or later her secret would come out. For now, though, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the air grew cool, she let herself breathe in the rare feeling of being seen, not as Amelia Rose, not as the woman who had been ridiculed in a restaurant, but as Olivia Parker. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Mark Bennett's office, spilling gold across the polished floors and mahogany shelves. The room felt less like a workspace and more like a private library. Glass cases lined the walls, displaying first editions, personal letters, and pages yellowed with age, pieces of literature preserved like holy relics. Olivia stood near one of the shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of books she recognized, titles that had once kept her company through long, lonely nights. The space felt sacred, almost too intimate. She glanced back at Mark, who had just unlocked one of the cabinets. "You're the only person outside my family who's ever seen this collection," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "That's a lot of trust." He smiled faintly. "It feels like walking someone through your soul." Olivia's heart gave a nervous thump. She'd never been invited this far into anyone's private world before, not like this. She turned back toward the cabinet where a row of notebooks and drafts rested under the glass. Her eyes scanned the familiar bindings until something made her breath hitch. There, tucked between leather-bound journals, was a notebook she knew too well. A simple spiral-bound draft worn at the edges, with a faint coffee stain on the cover. Her own handwriting looped across the front in ink that had begun to fade. "The Garden in the Fog, first draft." Her blood ran cold. Without meaning to, she reached for it. Her fingers hesitated in mid-air, but the pull was too strong. She lifted it gently, her heart pounding, flipping to the first page where she had once scrawled her pen name, Amelia Rose. Her throat tightened. This wasn't supposed to be here. That draft had been hers. Private, hidden. She'd left it in a box years ago, never expecting it to resurface. How on earth did Mark have it? "Wait!" came his voice from the doorway. Olivia spun around, the notebook clutched to her chest like contraband. Mark stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the draft in her hands. His expression wasn't one of suspicion, but dawning realization. "Is that—" His voice trailed off. She swallowed hard, her palms sweating against the worn paper. There was no point in pretending. Slowly she nodded. "It's mine." Mark stepped closer, almost reverently. "You're Amelia Rose." The words hung in the air like a confession. Olivia exhaled shakily. "Yes, I'm Amelia Rose." For a long moment he just stared at her, piecing it all together. The book that had changed him, the lines that had saved him, the woman who had stood across from him in a restaurant trembling under the weight of someone else's cruelty. But there was no shock in his expression, no disbelief, only awe. He stepped forward slowly as though afraid to startle her and gently took the notebook from her trembling hands. "That explains everything," he murmured. "The way you see people. The way you write like you've bled every word." Olivia's eyes stung. "I didn't want anyone to know. I thought if people saw me, really saw me, they wouldn't take the words seriously. They'd just see this." She gestured helplessly at her body, shame tightening her chest. Mark's voice softened, steady as a grounding hand. "No, they'd see you, and that's more than enough." Her throat burned with unshed tears. "You don't understand. I wrote those books because I couldn't say those things out loud. On the page I could be brave, but in person, I've spent years hiding, afraid of the exact look you're giving me now." He frowned slightly. "What look?" "Like you finally know the truth." Mark shook his head, stepping closer until there was only a breath between them. "Olivia, the truth doesn't scare me. It makes sense of everything. Why your words hit so deep, why dinner with you felt like recognition." Her breath hitched. For so long she had braced herself for rejection, for laughter, for disappointment, and instead here he was, treating her secret not like a liability, but like a miracle. He reached out slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his arms came around her in a quiet embrace. Not dramatic, not rushed, just grounding. "You're one of us," he whispered into her hair, "one of the broken who learned how to build something beautiful anyway." She didn't cry, but something deep within her softened, as if the armor she had carried for years had finally cracked. For the first time in her life, she felt fully seen, not just as a writer, not just as a body people judged, but as Olivia Parker, whole and unhidden. They spent the next hour talking, their voices low, steady. Mark asked how she had kept it hidden all of these years. She admitted she had been terrified, not of writing, but of being seen outside the words, where she didn't feel beautiful, where she didn't feel safe. Mark listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his silence patient. And for the first time, Olivia began to believe she might finally belong, not as a pen name, not as an illusion, but as herself. When she finally rose to leave, the city outside had dipped into twilight, the office bathed in soft amber light. Mark walked her to the door, his hand brushing hers just once, enough to remind her that she wasn't walking away unseen anymore. For years, Olivia had believed her stories were the only parts of her worth sharing. But tonight, in the quiet of Mark's office, she discovered something she never expected. Sometimes the most powerful story is the one you finally live out loud. The publishing event was meant to be small and intimate. Wine glasses clinking softly, jazz humming in the background, and the low buzz of conversation among editors, agents, and authors. Olivia Parker had been invited as Mark Bennett's guest, a quiet acknowledgement of the growing closeness between them. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled loosely into a bun. Nothing flashy, nothing to call attention to herself. She didn't want the spotlight. She just wanted to stand beside him without shrinking. At first it felt almost safe. She lingered near a shelf of books, sipping sparkling water, listening as Mark moved through the room with easy confidence. He never left her completely. His eyes would find hers across the crowd, a silent tether that steadied her heart. Then she heard it. Her pen name, Amelia Rose. The words floated over the soft music like a shard of glass. She turned her head slightly, catching sight of Andrew Collins, Mark's longtime friend and second-in-command, standing near the bar with a group of colleagues. He held his drink lazily, his voice just loud enough to slice through the room. "So Mark's dating a romance novelist now," Andrew said with a smirk. "I pictured someone more polished, not so inspirational Instagram aesthetic, you know?" The group chuckled. One woman covered her mouth as if she knew it was cruel, but laughed anyway. Olivia's chest constricted instantly. The shame was fast, sharp, and far too familiar. She had heard versions of it her whole life in locker rooms, whispered on buses, in the mirror when she caught her own reflection. Too much. Not enough. Wrong. She set her glass down quietly, her hand trembling, and stepped out of the room before anyone could see her face. Minutes later, Mark found her in a quiet hallway, her back against the cool plaster, her arms crossed tightly around herself. The look on his face told her he had heard. "I told him to shut it," he said, breath tight. "If he ever—" "It's not just him," she cut in, her voice raw. "It's the world, Mark. It's always been the world." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Olivia!" Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "You've been kind. Too kind. But I can't be part of your world if I haven't even figured out how to own mine yet." He opened his mouth to protest, but she shook her head gently. "I need space," she whispered, "to figure out if I can still be me when people are looking, when they're judging, when they're laughing." That night, she sent him a message. "You're everything I didn't think I'd find, but I need to walk alone for a little while. Not because I don't care, but because I finally do, about myself." She signed it not as Amelia Rose, but as Olivia Parker. The next morning, she deleted her social media accounts. No announcement, no explanation, just silence. The curtain between her and the world dropped completely. At first, the quiet was unbearable. She woke each morning to an emptiness where notifications used to be, where readers once poured their gratitude into her inbox. Without the voices of strangers echoing her worth, she felt adrift. But slowly, the stillness became something else. She began to rise before the sun, lacing up old running shoes that hadn't seen daylight in years. Her first attempts at jogging were clumsy and painful. Her knees ached, her chest burned, her breath came in ragged bursts, but she kept going. Not to be smaller, not to prove herself, not to punish her body into submission. She moved because her body deserved to move, for her. At night she journaled. "One sentence a day, nothing more. I cried, but I didn't cancel on myself. I made my bed. I stood up again after I fell." Each line was a stitch in the fabric of a self she was rebuilding. Cooking followed. Real meals, not takeout eaten in secret. She experimented with food that made her feel strong, not ashamed. She joined a small yoga class at a community center where no one laughed when she couldn't touch her toes. For the first time, her body became a place to inhabit rather than escape, and she stopped writing for everyone else. For years, her words had been shaped by expectation, by fear, by the need to be worthy in the eyes of strangers. Now she filled page after page with paragraphs no one would ever read, words that didn't need to be beautiful to matter, words that were hers alone. Meanwhile, Mark never flooded her inbox with pleas. He didn't chase or demand explanations. Instead, every morning at the same time, a single short message would appear on her phone. Sometimes poetic, sometimes silly, always thoughtful. Wherever you're walking today, I hope your feet feel lighter. The moon's been quiet lately. I think she's waiting for your voice. If the world feels loud, remember you're allowed to mute it. Olivia never replied, but she read everyone. Sometimes with a smile, sometimes through tears, sometimes pressing the phone against her chest, as if she could absorb his kindness through her skin. And though he didn't know it, or maybe he did, those quiet notes helped her keep going. One Sunday morning, she went running in the park near the little cafe where they had once sat. Her stride was steadier now, her breath calmer. She even allowed herself music in her earbuds, the beat syncing with her feet. For the first time, she felt strong. Then her toe caught on the uneven edge of the sidewalk. She stumbled hard, her knee scraping gravel, her palms burning. She winced at the sting, looking down at the thin trickle of blood. Instinctively, she reached into her pocket for the wrinkled cloth she always carried now. She wiped the wound, stood carefully, tested her weight on the leg. It hurt, but it held. She straightened, brushed off the dirt, and kept running. On a nearby bench, unseen, Mark sat frozen. He had been walking the parallel path as he often did, hoping for just a glimpse of her. He had half risen when she fell, ready to run to her side. But when he saw her stand, saw her keep going, he sat back down slowly, his chest full. She doesn't need saving, he whispered to himself. She's saving herself. And for the first time, he realized he didn't love her for who she was with him. He loved her for who she had become without him. The downtown book venue glowed in the soft golden light of late spring. Rows of neatly arranged chairs stretched across the floor, each one filled with eager readers clutching copies of Amelia Rose's newest release. For years she had remained a mystery, her identity hidden behind a pen name. Tonight, she would step into the light as Olivia Parker, not the anonymous voice behind the words, but the woman who had lived them. Backstage, Olivia smoothed the skirt of her white dress. It was simple, unadorned, yet elegant. She had chosen it deliberately, not to impress, not to conceal, but to reflect the peace she had finally begun to claim for herself. Her heart pounded as the host's voice echoed through the speakers. Please welcome, for the first time in public, Amelia Rose, known to us now as Olivia Parker. A hush fell over the room as she stepped into view. The spotlight washed over her, but instead of shrinking, she inhaled deeply and lifted her chin. Her golden hair was pulled into a low ponytail, strands framing her face in soft waves. She didn't look like the woman who had been ridiculed in restaurants or whispered about in publishing circles. She looked like herself, whole, present, unhidden. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then came the applause. Hesitant at first, then swelling into something warm and genuine. Olivia stepped to the microphone. Her voice, steady but gentle, carried through the hall. Hello, my name is Olivia Parker. Many of you know me as Amelia Rose. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the story behind the name. Olivia smiled faintly, her hands resting lightly on the podium. I spent years hiding behind pages, behind fear, behind the idea that strength meant silence. But I've learned something. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what hurt you. It means walking through the world without needing to prove you belong. Her words floated like poetry, hanging in the stillness. People nodded, some with tears shimmering in their eyes. In the very back row, Mark Bennett stood quietly, his tall frame blending into the shadows. He hadn't spoken to her in months, not since she had chosen to step away and find herself. He had respected her silence, sending nothing but those short morning messages until even those stopped. Tonight, he hadn't come to reclaim her. He had come to witness her, When she scanned the audience, her gaze swept past hundreds of faces before landing on his. Just for a second, their eyes locked, her breath caught. He didn't smile or wave. He simply stood there, steady, his presence saying more than words ever could. The event moved forward. Olivia signed books, listening to readers share how her words had carried them through heartbreak and illness, loneliness and fear. A woman with graying hair whispered, "Your books reminded me I was still human during chemo." Olivia clasped her hands and whispered back, "You always were." A teenager with chipped black nails admitted she had nearly given up on writing until Amelia Rose gave her permission to keep going. Olivia wrote in the girl's book, "The world needs your voice." Each story sank deeper into her heart, proof that her words had mattered even when she hadn't believed she did. Near the end, the host returned with a microphone. "Before we close, Olivia has agreed to read a passage from her new book." Olivia opened the hardback to a marked page and began. Her voice carried clear and unflinching. "They may laugh at your weight, your scars, the chapters of your life they never cared to read, but they will never laugh loud enough to drown out the voice of someone who stood back up, rising from pain. That is the kind of beauty they'll never understand." The room was silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Only the sound of quiet sniffles, someone stifling tears, the collective weight of truth pressing gently against every heart. When she closed the book, the audience rose to their feet, not in wild excitement but in reverence, a standing ovation for a woman who had once hidden her face, now standing unafraid. Olivia bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. Then, as the applause faded and the signing line thinned, one last figure stepped forward. A book slid across the table toward her, her newest release, still crisp. She looked up. "Mark," her breath caught, and for a moment the world blurred. The murmurs, the rustle of papers, the faint hum of lights overhead. All that remained was the space between them. "You saved me," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of months unsaid. "Twice, once with your words, once with your silence." Her eyes stung, a tear slipping free. "You waited." "I would have waited longer," he replied. He reached for her hand, not demanding but asking. She placed hers in his without hesitation. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her chair and stepped around the table. No speeches, no drama, just presence, just choice. Together they walked toward the exit, shoulders brushing, laughter slowly returning to their lips. Outside, the evening sun melted through the glass panes, painting the world in gold. And for the first time, Olivia realized the light wasn't just falling on her. It was following her. Her story was no longer one of survival. It was love, real, earned, and her own. The story of Olivia Parker, once mocked, once hidden behind a pen name, reminds us of something universal. The weight of shame can bend us, but it cannot break us if we choose to rise. She was told she was too much, not enough, or the wrong kind of woman. Yet the very pieces of herself that the world tried to diminish became the voice that healed strangers and eventually drew love to her doorstep. Her journey shows us that true strength isn't found in proving our worth to others. It's found in walking forward even when our knees are scraped, our hearts are bruised, and our voices tremble. Healing isn't the absence of scars. It's the decision to live without apology, to show up exactly as we are. Mark didn't save Olivia. He simply stood beside her until she remembered how to save herself. And in the end, that's what love is meant to do, not erase our wounds, but honor them. Not rescue us, but remind us that we are already worthy of being chosen. The lesson is simple, yet profound. You don't need to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's story. You are already enough. And the people meant to walk with you will never ask you to disappear. As Olivia stood beneath the lights, no longer Amelia Rose hiding behind pages, but a woman unafraid to be seen, she gave us all permission to do the same, to claim our voices, to believe that scars can be holy ground, to understand that worth was never something to be earned. It was always ours. So if this story stirred something in your heart, take a moment to reflect. What are the parts of yourself you've been hiding because the world told you they were too much? Maybe today is the day you stop apologizing for existing. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the very light someone else needs. If Olivia's journey reminded you of your own, give this video a like to help it reach someone still searching for hope. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales of resilience, healing, and second chances. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us we are never truly alone.